I am really in awe of our guest today, Kelsey.
She writes with such a strong voice.
I'm very excited to talk with Kate Manning about her new book, Gilded Mountain.
Kate Manning is the author of the critically acclaimed novels My Notorious Life and White Girl. A former documentary television producer and winner of 2 Emmy Awards, Kate has written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, among other publications. She was a co-founder in 2018 of the Proxy Project, a Get Out the Vote effort designed to increase youth voter turnout.
Welcome to the first 50 pages, Kate.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here with you both. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored.
I have to say, I was hooked from the first paragraph of Gilded Mountain. It really does pull the reader in, and it sets the tone for the story. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your latest novel?
Oh, sure. Okay, so Gilded Mountain, I don't know. If I had to do an elevator pitch or something, I might say that. I think of it in a couple of ways. It's about a young woman in a small Colorado mountain town, a mining town that I named Moonstone. And in some ways, I think of it as the education of Sylvie Pelletier. She's this young woman who lives in this very extreme circumstance, and she's determined to get a better life for herself. And so in a way, it's her education in these 2 years she spends in this little town. But I also think of it as a kind of subverted Cinderella story, because she gets herself opportunities with the local millionaires in the local chateau, and so in that sense, I could also describe it as maybe like Downton Abbey set in the Colorado mountains, and it examines a period of history, the early 1900s, when there was a lot of labor unrest and newspaper wars and other things, which make for very dramatic and exciting material for fiction.
One of the things that's mentioned throughout the story are the tempting luxuries of the wealthy characters, their leisure and ease, their parties and possessions. But you see that in very stark contrast to the people living in the company town, the mining barracks, I guess, of Moonstone. And it really was interesting the way that you created those dynamics in the story. And there are a lot of parallels with things happening in present times, but I think we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, I do like how you refer to it kind of as the Downton Abbey of the American West, but I do think it goes deeper.
I hope so. I do, because as you said, I think I'm drawn to, I don't know, maybe some of the tensions that we are currently or have been experiencing over the last couple of years or decades. And when you look back in time, you discover all kinds of history that you think, I can't believe I never knew this, particularly say about the American labor movement and what workers, miners in stone quarries, hard rock mines and coal mines fought for in the way they won rights and better working conditions and better lives and built the American middle class. But you don't want to cram that all into a novel. You want to.
It'd be a lot to digest in one book.
Yeah. So, I mean, I hope this book wears research very lightly, because it's a story, it's a romance, it's a family story. It's about a young woman coming to find her own voice, I hope. And so I want that narrative to pull you through the pages. And if you begin to understand what it was like in 1908 to live under 14 feet of snow in a very small cabin, then you'll you'll I guess you'll get a good feel for that time, what it was like there.
Yeah, and I think you're right, the storyline does pull you through because, full confession, I generally don't read on my phone, but I read the advanced copy of your book on my phone. I generally wouldn't do that, but I was just compelled to keep reading and keep going back to the story. I need to know what happens next. So I'm wearing my cheaters and I'm, reading on my phone screen. But it was a fantastic book. Really, I really enjoyed it.
And then,
I'm
of course,
so glad
we
to
were
hear
prepping for the episode, I read that you have some personal inspiration for this book. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. My mother and my grandmother are both painters, they're artists. And so growing up, I was very, sort of steeped in visual, imagery and art. And so I think images really inform my work and have done. So I found this old photograph in my parents' attic years ago, and it was this cool kind of sepia tinted long panorama of a crowd of people standing in front of a mountain range. And I had no idea what it was. It said the little title was called National Retail Monument Dealers at Marble, Colorado, 1915. So I brought it down to my dad and I said, why do we have this? What is this? Who are these people? He goes, I don't know. I think one of them is my grandfather. And I think he had something to do with quarrying the marble for the Lincoln Memorial. And I said, whoa, okay. I pictured a guy with a pickaxe, actually. But I hung the photo in my office because I thought it was kind of, I was sort of pleased to have a tie to that iconic monument. It stands for democratic ideals and unity. And so it was hanging there for a long time. And finally, as my dad was getting older, I decided I would try to find out more. And lo and behold, this ancestor was not a guy with a pickaxe. He was the president of the company that did indeed supply the stone for for the Lincoln Memorial. So I got very interested in the history of Marble, Colorado and Redstone, Colorado at that, in really kind of before my ancestors' time there. And I found these stories that were just jaw-dropping and these pictures of the mountains and the sheer difficulty of working in sub-zero temperatures and making subsistence wages and trying to get these giant, beautiful blocks of stone out of the mountains at 9,000 feet of altitude. And I found out a lot of other things which have made their way into the story of Sylvie Pelletier.
You've had some high praise for your book from other authors, and Christina Baker Klein, she said in one of the blurbs for Gilded Mountain that the book is so immersive, so richly imagined, that reading it feels akin to time travel. And I really got that. It's richly detailed and such a strong sense of place in this book that we really do feel like we're experiencing Moonstone, Colorado, even though that's a fictitious place, but based in the reality of your research.
Well, I don't know what that's a really high compliment, but especially coming from Christina, she's really an amazing writer and an amazing literary citizen too. She's written a number of books which have really captured people's imaginations, and we can talk maybe later. I got to know her because we both wrote about the orphan trains heading west, and that's how we came to know each other's work. But I think that sometimes so-called historical fiction gets ghettoized or put on a particular shelf with a particular stereotype in mind, and that might be that because sometimes writers get so enamored of the research and the fascination with how people did things in the past that they feel it's it's necessary to explain every little thing, like, okay, this is a Garland stove that used bituminous coal with isinglass windows. And I just am not that in. I want it to feel as organic as you and I, all of us talking about things that we take for granted. We shorthand things, and I just get fascinated with the vocabulary and the language, but I really don't like to get would like it to be immersive, as if you were the character experiencing these conditions, and the freezing cold, and the beans for dinner again.
Yeah.
So, kind of keeping with our theme of historical inspiration, can we talk about Mary Mother Jones for a minute? I honestly had no idea of her story until reading her book, or your book, not her book. And then I decided, I had to, of course, be a librarian and research and learn more about her. She really just has such a fascinating story. And I guess my question is, did you always have a plan to incorporate this real life heroine into your story, or did she kind of appear and take shape through your research or your writing?
Oh, Kelsey, I'm so glad you asked me that, because in fact, I was so enamored of Mother Jones and her story, which is, very inspiring. She was very fierce and theatrical and powerful labor leader for many years in American history. She was actually branded the most dangerous woman in America for her efforts to help workers. So I actually, after my last novel, I was looking around in the past for other women whose stories might have been kind of lost in the cracks or erased from our history books. And so I sort of started writing about her. And I thought, well, maybe she had a young assistant, and maybe it would be great to set this in the Paint Creek cabin strike. Or was very fascinated by how Mother Jones led something called the March of the Mill Children, and we don't focus on this so much, but she led about 100 children in a march from Philadelphia to New York to go talk to Theodore Roosevelt, the president, ask him to end child labor. And some of these kids were 6 or 8 years old, and they were missing fingers from getting injured in the textile looms. And she, brought this raffish crowd along the roads and found places for them to sleep and eat, and attracted a bunch of attention to the cause. She was very powerful and effective. But I thought she was almost too much for a novel, and there's already a lot written about her and almost not enough room to imagine.
Yeah.
And I needed to make things up. So over time, the story evolved.
And I think the characters in your book were really one of the strong points. For me, I love things that are character driven. And the primary characters in your book are women, but your characters are all kinds of women, different backgrounds, cultures, and classes. But they're all faced with living in a time that is hostile towards women, regardless of their station in life. And, in so many ways, it really does echo to our current times. And it made me think about that a lot in reading this book. Because I personally, I love strong female characters in literature. And I think that they help us to find our voice and to give, women permission to act out. But I also think that our relationships with other women also give us that. We can lift each other up. We can be competitive or petty, and so the question, let me get to the question, right? Did you have to work for these relationships of these characters in your writing, or do you feel like they develop naturally for you?
Oh, I think they develop naturally. I have relationships and role models with women in my own life. And so they're exactly as you describe them, how some women lift up and some women are competitive and some women are taught to stay quiet and be quote unquote feminine, which you know, in our times, I think sometimes that conversation is fraught and weighted down. But if you look in the past, a couple things happened. It becomes a good kind of surrogate to discuss what's going on today, because there's so many threads that you see coming from the past into our own times. Um, and in this in both both of these past two novels, um, women are, as you say, in a hostile climate. It's they find the men that support them and the men who understand what they're going through, and they use the skills that they have and the tools that they have to defy authority and subvert expectations. And so in Gilded Mountain, there's a powerful newspaper editor, for example. She is based on a real character, a woman named Sylvia Smith in Marble, Colorado, who published a newspaper that was pro-labor, pro-women's suffrage in a time when women could not vote or could not own property. And in Colorado, she was very critical of big business like the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. And when she criticized the Marble Company, she was arrested, jailed, run out of town, her press destroyed. And that's, to me, speaks a lot about how women's stories get erased. Yeah. It's not that women were shrinking violets and all giggly and trying to get a man all the time, the way you see in some historical accounts. They were very strong, especially Western women in this era, the conditions in which they made homes and families it's astonishingly impressive.
Yeah. And we have talked about, Sylvie is the main character, and the world sees her as prim and proper, and she's been taught that silence is golden. Growing up myself, I think we all have, every woman has probably heard something, from the world. Like I heard sugar and spice and everything nice. That's what little girls are made of. But I love that you let us see Sylvie's anger and her rage with the world. I think that's just a fantastic element of her character. But then also how she is resilient through loss and is able to endure hardships in her life. I think those were fantastic elements of her character.
Oh, thank you. I think if you want to find a woman's story, you really have to read between the lines and pull back for a second and go, wait a minute, was she really the most dangerous woman in America or the wickedest woman in New York? What was really going on? What if you were in her shoes? And is that, and then you find this extraordinary courage and how women try different ways of protecting themselves and being comfortable in life. So one of the other the other elements is that it's true. She has been taught that, complaints are the seeds of misery.
Yeah.
But then she sort of understands that, well, maybe misery is the seed of complaint. And if you complained a bit or if you spoke up. And so the novel is really a look at how she tries to find her own voice and have the courage to use it, because she understands that sometimes the consequences for speaking up are very severe. Yeah. Women are told to bite your tongue and say nothing because it's safer.
Yeah.
And so here in this book, she experiences, she sees ways that she might be able to do that, to speak up.
In researching for this episode, I came across an online presentation that you did with the Westport Library with author and Professor Rhea Hirschman. And it was a couple years ago. But The presentation was so excellent and so eye-opening, and I would highly recommend it to anyone listening today who is interested in the politicization of women's reproductive rights. And then I learned that one of your previous novels, My Notorious Life, was based on a real person. And because of this presentation, I really wanted to dive into this book. And I'm enthralled with the character of Axie Muldoon, too. Like, I know we're talking about Gilded Mountain, but I really can't wait to get back to the story. And the New York Times called My Notorious Life an action-packed, thought-provoking page-turner, and I really couldn't put it down last night. It's fantastic. So
I think Jen's thinking how she can move it up her to-do list today. Would be like,
Yeah.
how can I tie this into my job duties today?
it's one of those books that I want to make time to read because I want to know where
Well,
this...
you have the best job for that.
Right? If only we had more time to read.
I know, but I want to just take 1 second to say how much I revere librarians. I spent most of my childhood at the public library, bringing home as many books as I could pile up to my chin, and then go back and get more the next week. So, but particularly now, in these days of book bans and really a misunderstanding of what libraries and librarians are for in a community and the way you build communities, I just have to say thank you to that for that. So it's my little moment of gratitude. But the Westport Library and Professor Rhea Hirschman, maybe you don't know, but she was my high school English teacher.
Yeah, they said that in the presentation, and I was like, wow, how cool is that?
Really cool full circle moment.
Really, really cool thing. And it was really, really fun for both of us. But we wanted to talk about the history of women's reproductive rights. And again, I really do think that a novel like this one can help you understand in a way that then a textbook can't help you do.
Yeah.
And I think a lot about what E.L. Doctorow said, which is that a historian will tell you what happened, but a novelist will tell you how it felt. And so in My Notorious Life, it's based loosely, very loosely, on the story of a woman who practiced as a midwife in the mid-1800s in New York City. She also provided birth control and abortions. And this was in a time of no anesthesia. And when the remedies, so-called, for birth control were somewhat dangerous and somewhat unreliable. But her name was, the real character was Madame Restel. And she put ads in the paper for years advertising things like lunar tablets for the relief of female complaint, not to be used when asterisk, the words were blacked out. Mm-hmm. And so women understood that these medicines would cause a miscarriage, which in many ways is exactly like what we see now when women are relying on medication abortions to terminate pregnancies that are unwanted. And so in the 1840s, actually the novel started with what I mentioned before, the orphan trains.
Yeah.
There were 30,000 homeless children living on the streets of New York. And do-gooders, religious Samaritans, thought it would be great to send the kids out west to Iowa and Idaho and Wyoming and Illinois to find fresh air and good families, because they were lingering on the streets of New York. Maybe they'd grow up to slit your throat or pick your pocket. I don't know. But yeah. So off they went. And so this character, Axie Muldoon, starts as one of these street urchins. And again, it was an image that of a child, a street child, that sparked that novel too. And when I got her out west on the orphan train, I thought, oh gosh, I don't really know anything about, I thought I was writing a novel about New York. So in the 1840s. So when I stumbled upon a photograph of somebody called the wickedest woman in New York, I went, oh gosh, who's that? And she took over the book in a certain way. Her history did, and I became a new student of what our foremothers went through in the days before birth control and choice was an option for women. And when I wrote it in 2013, I could tell that the winds were changing, but I didn't think we would be where we are today with states outlawing abortion and coming for birth control next. So I think it's not a political screed by any chance. I want it to be a rip-roaring Dickensian tale of a scrappy person, falling in love and searching for a family. And I think it is that. But if you want to understand what it was like, as Dr. O said, back then to be a woman, I think it gives you a good flavor. I hope so.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So you are co-founder of the Proxy Project, a powerful get out the vote strategy that pairs high school activists who are too young to cast a ballot with millennials or previously sporadic voters who will promise to be their proxies. Could you tell us a little bit more about this?
Oh, yeah, that was we founded that in 2018. I was working with a friend of mine Susan Addis Stone, who founded the Women on 20s motivation to get a woman on a $20 bill. And she and another woman were so successful that they got the Treasury Department to put Harriet Tubman on the 20. And I think that's still in the works and it's still happening. But we were talking after the 2016 election about the young people from Parkland and other places that had experienced mass shootings, and how they were activist and engaged and pushing for political change, and they were really kind of penetrating, but they couldn't vote. They were too young to vote. And we saw that that this was a frustration, not just for them, but amongst political get out the vote organizations who were dismayed that young people hadn't registered in the numbers or didn't show up at the polls in a way that would make a difference to youth voter issues. And so we thought, if you could get a high school kid to say to an older brother in college or to a neighbor who might be not going to go to vote, I can't vote, but please, will you do it for me? Will you be my proxy? And so we developed a platform and a website, and we got captains in 30 states or so, all rallying young people to get just one person to the polls. And after the election, I think we had some success in doing that. We passed the platform off to a system of called Democracy Prep public schools, and they have civics education programs in, 15 or 20 states. Nevada is one of them. New York is another. And so they think that this is a very good tool to educate young people in being good participants in democracy. It's a civics exercise. So every election now, they get their students to find a proxy and get that one person to the polls.
Very, very cool. That's such a worthwhile endeavor. So, of course, because we're talking about the Gilded Mountain, we should probably get back to it a little bit. I do hope that book clubs will find their way to this book. I think it would be a fantastic book to discuss, being a former book club leader myself. Gilded Mountain will be in bookstores and libraries on November 1st. Librarians love to help empower people to get registered to vote. So if you need help, stop into your local library and they'll get you the information you need.
So thank you so much for joining us today, Kate, on the first 50 pages. It has really been a pleasure, and I could sit and chat with you for hours, I think, about all of this. It's fascinating to me, your work and your partnerships and your experience. But thank you for giving us your time today to talk about Gilded Mountain.
Oh, Jen and Kelsey, it's been my absolute pleasure. It's such a rare thing to get to talk to people who are so engaged with literature and community, and I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, Kate.
You too, both of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.